Hello and welcome to today's webinar. We're happy you could join us. My name is Naya Hyde and I'm the Marketing Assistant for K-12 Education Products here at Brooks Publishing. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. You'll be muted for the webinar, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the questions box. We'll take these questions after the presentation during the Q&A portion of the webinar. For the presentation, you might want to minimize the GoToWebinar bar on your monitor so you can see more of your screen. You can do that by clicking the orange button with the arrow in the top corner of the control bar. If you need to enlarge the bar again to ask a question, you can just click the orange button again. If you experience any audio issues at any point, you can switch to phone by clicking in the audio section of the webinar panel and using the dial-in information provided. Also, we are recording this webinar. Everyone who registered for the event will receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email tomorrow. During today's presentation, Elsa Cárdenas-Hagan will reference content from Literacy Foundations for English Learners, a comprehensive guide to evidence-based instruction, her new book. An essential text for courses on literacy foundations and biliteracy, and an ideal in-service professional development resource. This accessible book will give teachers the knowledge base they need to help English learners develop strong literacy skills and achieve academic success. Aligned with IDA's knowledge and practice standards, this book prepares current and future educators to teach English learners the key components of language and literacy, as first described in the National Literacy Panel Report. For each component, teachers will get a dedicated chapter with research-based insights on how to teach English learners, guidance on making connections across languages when teaching that component, and ready-to-use principles and strategies for instruction. Learning objectives, study questions, and extended application activities help educators grow their knowledge and apply it in their classrooms. To learn more about this book, you can visit the URL shown on your screen. I'm happy to announce that Brooks will be giving away 3 copies of Elsa's book, Literacy Foundations for English Learners. Winners will be randomly selected from today's live attendees and notified by email after the webinar. To increase your chances, be sure to submit your questions in the questions pane throughout the presentation. Also, we did want to mention at the end of the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a short survey. We would love to know what you thought of the webinar, and anyone who completes the survey will be entered to win a copy of the book. Everyone watching this webinar will be able to download a certificate of attendance as well. For those of you watching live, you may download your certificate from the handouts pane. Live attendees will also be emailed their certificate in the next 24 hours. And for those of you who are watching this webinar as a recording, stay tuned at the end of today's webinar to learn how to access your certificate. Without further delay, I'm happy to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Elsa Cárdenas-Hagan is a bilingual speech and language pathologist, a certified teacher, dyslexia therapist, certified academic language therapist, and a qualified instructor. She's the president of the Valley Speech Language and Learning Center in Brownsville, Texas, and works with the Texas Institute for Measurement, Evaluation, and Statistics at the University of Houston. Elsa has spent the last 2 decades working with national research teams, designing assessments and interventions for English learners who struggle with learning to read. She has a passion for ensuring that every child in schools across the world has access to a highly qualified educator who can implement effective language and literacy instruction to diverse populations. Elsa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and I'm delighted that many of you who've joined today, and I hope others will be able to join at a later time. Maybe you'll tell a friend about this coffee chat, and thank you to Brooks Publishing for sponsoring it. So I would like to tell you today, I'm very delighted to kind of give you an overview of this wonderful book that has taken, much of my life and passion for really working with English learners. And today I'm going to be covering some of the contents of the book regarding first and second language components for English learners, the 5 components of literacy development for English learners, looking at language and literacy connections, and thinking about very explicit instruction for these students and what to think about for our lesson design. And I really think about, it's my hope that persons who, work in schools or people who are, teaching at the university will be able to use this book as a resource and also help our teachers to be very prepared for working with English learners, and especially in the area of literacy. And so as we begin in the book, some of the beginning chapters really will focus on, for example, chapter 2 focuses on the language components and really looking at these language components of phonology, semantics, morphology, syntax, and pragmatics, but also thinking about them from the lens of English learners. So every language in the world has the system of sounds, phonology, right? And so in the English language, we have about 44 sounds. In the Spanish language, we have about 22 sounds. And in other languages, we see those variations. And as you can see between Spanish and English, English having about double the number of sounds. But every language also has semantics, and that's words and word meanings, and really understanding words is something that our English learners need to really develop to master that bilingualism and that biliteracy. Morphology, another component of language, meaning those word parts. That's a fancy word for morphemes, the small units of meanings. And so these techniques for morphology are excellent for English learners to develop excellent vocabulary. And then we have syntax. That's really, when you think about that, you can think about that as grammar. And when we think about syntax, when you are learning more than one language, knowing how those words work in the language, how they can go together or not go together to make a very complete sentence is so important, not only for language development, but very important because it really applies to reading fluency, reading comprehension. And the icing on the cake is what I call pragmatic language skills. Every language in the world has rules about how you use language, how you engage in a conversation, how you, maintain a topic or initiate that topic, or take turns in conversation. And that also can apply to higher forms of language, being written language. So each of these components of language are very much addressed in the book, and really from the lens of, what does this mean for an English learner? In addition, in chapter 3 of the book, we very much review some key research, especially from the National Reading Panel report. That National Reading Panel report is that meta-analysis that was published in the year 2000 that helped us to look at what are the essential components that we must be teaching for literacy amongst our students. And that would be phonological awareness, that ability to, process and manipulate the sounds, phonics, understanding, how those symbols and sounds work in that language to be able to read them accurately, fluency, how do we read as if we're speaking to a friend so that that can free us up for comprehension. But also, we must not forget that we need a robust vocabulary to really understand and comprehend and get to the ultimate goal of reading, which is comprehension. But in addition, in the book, we cover the highlights of developing literacy in a second language. This is the report of the National Literacy Panel on Language Minority Children and Youth. And so here, what we find out is those 5 components of literacy that we know from the National Reading Panel, that's crucial also for English learners. However, the special considerations mean that, we have to keep in mind how they're developing their language and how they're developing that literacy. And what about what they know from the native language to help the second language? And in the United States, that would be English as a second language. What about those cross-linguistic relationships, which are so crucial to being able to develop language and literacy? But also, what about the social and cultural context in which our students live and experience? And we're concerned about the instructional opportunities and professional development opportunities for our teachers. When we look across the whole United States, we see about 3% of our teachers are certified for English as a second language, and yet we're seeing that the population is more like getting to 10%. So we need, minimally another 7% of teachers to have this specialization. And then there's many issues around assessment. Are these children developing as we expect, or are there some issues that we should really look at and we should make sure to assess to make sure they're on target when compared to their peers? So those are two very important documents, and we do refer to other research, specifically in chapter 3 of the book. But also, as we look at language and literacy, we want to make sure that every instructor understands why language is essential for literacy. So remember when I just now spoke to you about those components of language, that's on the left, phonology. Why is that important for reading and writing? Well, you have to process the sounds and know the sounds to master phonological awareness and to be able to put those sounds to those symbols for decoding and reading and to build that fluency. But even as we look at written language, you must have intact phonology skills, right, in order to achieve spelling abilities. And so that's how that component of language relates to literacy. We also know vocabulary, and a fancy word as we think about the components of language would be semantics, words and word meanings, and morphology, knowing those word parts to help build and know more words. And that extensive vocabulary really does help a student's listening comprehension, reading comprehension, their decoding, their fluency, and this eventually leads them to the highest form of language, which would be written composition. So this is how vocabulary, specifically semantics and morphology, how they contribute to reading and writing. And then syntax. When we think about syntax, we think about really understanding how words work in a language. And that can help our students in their listening comprehension, their reading comprehension. It helps them in reading fluency because they can almost predict what words will come next by knowing about words and how words are used within sentences. And then certainly as we work on building those sentences and expanding upon that sentence length, that also will help us to create that cohesive paragraph as we're wanting to compose and write. And then pragmatics. This is often what we tend to forget, the icing on the cake, I say. So for English learners, it's so important to really experience the language and understand, that context, but also for teachers to understand the students' context, the students' culture. And when we think about pragmatics, this is where we think about the social registers of language and the academic registers. And typically, when you're learning a second language, you tend to learn the social things. And when we are in school, we often tell the students, that's right, that's one way of expressing, but here's a more formal way. And so really understanding those social registers, the informal ways in which we express ourselves in addition to the formal. But that can help as you're reading to understand what you're reading, to put two and two together and get that inferencing. And so that's going to be essential for reading comprehension. So those are the components of language and how they're necessary for reading and writing. And we know language, it's a natural process, but reading and writing, that's invented. But if you have strong language skills, you're going to be on that journey to strong literacy skills. It's also important for teachers to understand that students have every student that you work with has that capacity for language. And as we look at this in our book, we really, in chapter 2, really focus on what would be native language acquisition and what would be second language acquisition. In the native language acquisition, we see that when children are born, they speak, these are just some general things, but they speak their first words when they're 12 months of age. When they're 2, they can put 2 words together. When they're 3, 3-word sentences. When they're 4, they speak in 4-word sentences, and they start to have adjectives in their language. When they're 5, they start to speak in 5-word sentences. You see a lot of pronouns. And when they're 6, they're really putting in those prepositional phrases. When they're 7, they're starting to use a little bit more complex sentences. And 8 and above, even as adults, we speak in an average of like 8 to 9 word sentences. But it's very important for us to understand, did our students, develop language as expected? Because we want to know that, because then that's going to tell us a lot about their development of literacy. And not only do we want to know what happens in their native language, the home language, but we also want to know how they're progressing along for their second language. And these are stages that we describe. These are some of the models that are described in the book by Krashen and Terrell, saying that, well, I'm an English learner. I'm new to the school, and I might be at the pre-production stage where I'm just kind of taking in all the information. I'm learning, I'm listening, I'm reluctant to speak. And then I get more confidence and more practice. And so now I'm having and speaking in, 1 or 2 word sentences. And then by stage 3, I'm feeling very confident. And now you see me speaking in simple sentences. Stage 4, now I can speak in complex sentences. And by stage 5, we say it takes 5 to 7 years to get to the advanced language proficiency stage, which means now I'm able to speak in this new language of English, as well as a native English speaker. And so these are kind of the stages that we have to keep in mind as we work with English learners to develop those language skills, so that while they're developing those language skills, we can also be developing literacy skills. And so as we're developing the literacy skills, many of you already know about Dr. Jean Chall and her stages of reading development. And she very much describes that those early stages, stage 0, students are very much looking at print and they start to understand that the spoken word can be represented in print. And then they start to understand, here's these symbols, and these symbols have meaning, and now I can decode those words, right? Stage 2, they're very good at their phonological awareness and their phonics skills, and now they're building a lot of accuracy and fluency. But by the time a student's in about 3rd grade, they're at the point where it's no longer the mechanics of reading, but they read to learn. And then above 3rd grade, they read from multiple viewpoints through adolescence, and then by the time they graduate, hopefully from high school, they're at a point where they construct and reconstruct. So they're reading with a great purpose in mind. They're selecting that text that they're going to read, and they can form opinions and judgments and can really think about that abstract reasoning and comprehension of the book. So we need to be looking at the stages of language development, first language, second language, while also looking at the stages of reading development, and really be cohesive in our approach to language and literacy development. And we talk about this extensively in the book. In the book, we also cover phonological awareness, and that's that ability really to understand and process and manipulate the sound structure of the language. I mentioned to you, the English language has many more sounds than other languages, such as Spanish. But we know that this is a skill that's necessary in English and Spanish and Arabic and even in pictographic languages. It's a universal skill. And what we know is this tells us about that link to successful reading. And a message, look at point number 3. This is a message we really want to get across, that our students don't have to be at the advanced stage of any of language proficiency in English to benefit from English literacy development, especially phonological awareness. So the beautiful part about this is I can be working on phonological awareness skills in English, even though the student is not at an advanced language proficiency level. And that's important to know. I can start working on these early literacy skills in the second language while the student is developing second language literacy. It works so well together. We know that phonological awareness skills can transfer across languages, and students who have this very strong phonological awareness skills in a native language will have those strong phonological awareness skills in a second language. But what we want to do during our instruction is take advantage of those strong native language phonological awareness skills and incorporate those cross-linguistic connections. What overlaps? What doesn't overlap? And so when I am designing phonological awareness activities and lessons for my students, I should be thinking about what do they already know and have, and how can I incorporate that into the second language phonological awareness development. And so we want to provide you, with, activities. And so chapter 4 really reflects upon these different phonological awareness skills, such as rhyming and alliteration and moving up to the syllables. But most important is the phoneme awareness. And I want to break a myth. Here's the myth that many people will say. Other languages may be very syllabic. And so you hear people say, well, the Spanish language is a syllabic language. And so we don't need to spend so much time on individual sounds. And what I can tell you from much of the research that we have done at the University of Houston and other colleagues have done across this nation and other nations is that even in these other languages that appear to be quite syllabic, phonemes are very important for being able to read, and there's a very clear connection. When a student cannot process the sounds and manipulate those sounds and blend those sounds, then that tells us that's a warning sign for future reading problems. And so even in these languages that are, very reliable, like the Spanish language, the phonemes are very important, just like in the English language. So here's an example. So today we're going to practice identifying sounds within words. So can you say the word thumb? What are the sounds in the word thumb? That's right. Mm. Now look at my thumb. Can you show me your thumb? How do you say thumb in your home language, in your native language? Can you say it for me? Aha. I'm going to say it in English. Thumb. Show me your thumb. So what we do different here is we're not only working on the phonological awareness and making sure that they can segment that word thumb into the individual sounds, but we also want to very quickly address the meaning and the pronunciation. So that's going to be important. And so in chapter 4, we give examples and really look at phonological awareness across languages such as Arabic and Vietnamese and Spanish. In chapter 5, we talk a lot about phonics and what would be special about phonics instruction with English learners. And so when we look at this, we know that phonics knowledge is that, or phonics instruction is that study of the relationship between letters and sounds in order to read in alphabetic languages such as English. So in English, we have 26 letters and 44 sounds. So, we're going to look at, okay, here's this letter. What sound does it have? And sometimes we have sounds that have multiple spellings, right? But very important to the English language is learning that the English language has 6 syllable types, right? And so it's important to look across languages. What do they know from their native language? How does that apply to learning those 6 syllable types of the English language? And so what are some steps for how I can make this very explicit for my English learners? Well, I can say 3 words, for example, that will really, exemplify this common concept. And then I can write about it. I can have discussions and I can look across the languages and say, hey, what about in your native language? Does this concept exist, right? And how's it the same or how is it different from your native language to English? And then I give multiple opportunities for the students to read and master that new concept. So here's an example for this letter J, which is a very new sound, as for my Spanish speakers especially. So listen as I say these words with the same sound, right? And so I might say something like jam and jet, and let me write the words for you to see. What do you see at the beginning of each word? That's right. You see the letter J. The sound in English is J. In Spanish, it has a different sound, right? So our key word to unlock this sound is jaguar. Do you recognize this key word in your home language? Ah, very good. You knew that in Spanish it was jaguar. Very good. Let's use the word jaguar in a sentence. Oh, the jaguar can run very fast. Let's say the letter name, J, the key word, jaguar, the sound, J. Very good. We're not only going to write this letter, but we're also going to give you many opportunities to read words and sentences that have this sound and it's represented by this letter. So right here you see me going through, them being able to listen to the same concept, listen to that initial sound, being able to make the connection between the Spanish and English, and seeing how they're the same and how they're different, and then following up with more practice. We also know that open syllables, right? Open syllables end in a vowel, and the vowel sound is long. So what I want to say is in other languages, we may not have these 6-syllable types, especially in transparent languages like Spanish. So, they might see that A, and they might want to say the Spanish sound, ah, right? But here we have to teach them that whenever the syllable ends in the vowel, it'll say its name, A. The opposite of the open syllable is the closed syllable. Here, it's going to end in a consonant, right? And so that makes the vowel sound short. And so, for example, in Spanish, the vowel sounds never change, so they don't really have to know about syllable types. The vowel consonant E, right, that silent E, well, that pattern exists in many languages, but the E is not silent. The vowel R syllable, right? We say in English that R, right? The vowel and that R makes an unexpected sound, but in languages like Spanish, it says or and it never changes. So it's not unexpected. The vowel pair syllable, right, has 2 adjacent vowels. And so that would be like AU in the word auto. In Spanish, we have that very same word, but it's ow. So they have to know the difference between ow and ah. And then the final stable syllables. We have endings in other languages like full and shun and jun and chur and jur, right? Some of the pronunciations may differ. So I think what's challenging for the English language is really those vowel sounds, and it's essential for an English learner to learn these syllable types, but to also make those connections. That's what's different between the native language to the second language. And then when we think about reading fluency, in reading fluency, this is chapter 6 of the book. It really includes the features of not only reading words correctly, but reading them with the appropriate automaticity, the appropriate rate, and with the good expression or prosody. And here's where our students are going to need a lot of work. Our English learners can typically learn how to read the words correctly, but they'll need is a lot of work will be in that expression and that prosody and that phrasing. And so that's going to be important for them. So just know that English learners will be able to learn the code. They're going to read, but oftentimes they don't understand what they're reading. So again, we're going to need to work on that vocabulary, which we'll talk about. But don't just assume because reading fluency increases that their comprehension is going to be there. They're going to need extra work on the comprehension, on the vocabulary, and on the expressive language, because reading fluency and comprehension for English learners is moderated by their oral language proficiency. So that's what's different. That's what's special about reading fluency development amongst English learners. And then vocabulary, vocabulary, vocabulary. Our English learners need to build their vocabulary knowledge, and we need to make sure to give them the tools to develop that. And so we want to integrate lots of great word learning strategies, lots of opportunities to make those connections about what they know already and make connections to their lived experiences, making it very relevant. So we want intentional opportunities for use of these new words, and we can do this across all of the contents in which we teach our students. And so in chapter 7, we really talk about vocabulary. And we know that word learning strategies such as morphological awareness is very important for vocabulary building. And because as students learn to read, they have to be taught to attend to the smallest units of sounds in order to decode, but they have to know those morphemes to understand the meanings of new words. And so as we look at the morphemes, it's very interesting to see that cognates are words that are similar in spelling and meaning across the languages. And a lot of times the cognates will have morphemes within them. So those morphemes are the small units of meaning in a language. And about 60% of the English language comes from Latin. So learning those Latin roots, very important. The English language has 15% from the Greek. So between Latin and Greek, right, we already have 75% of the language. So that's going to be very good word learning strategies. And so we discuss this in detail in chapter 7. And here's an example of using this word part, a suffix, to generate words. And so I like to collect coins. So in that sentence, it's used as a verb. But if I add my suffix shun, I have a coin collection. Then that's going to be a noun. And since I'm the person who collects, I'm the collector. Look at that OR, the person who, right? And so as we look at that, we see that we change, and the same things about the collectibles, the adjectives, that is going to be important. So we're not only looking at morphology here, we're also looking at syntax, grammar, how those endings change the function and the grammatical function of each of these words. All right. And then as we look at comprehension, we talk about this in chapter 8, really looking at not only do we want to make sure that the English learners read words accurately, but it's going to be essential for you to work on their oral language development of the second language of English and explore their background knowledge, right? Making connections to their native language and their lived experiences, bringing that relevance to them. And it's okay. A lot of times people say, oh, you can't use the native language, but we can use it strategically when we're trying to explain a new concept. Absolutely, you can use that native language to preview that new concept. And we can really provide those explicit instructions of the multi-step reading strategies, what we know works for English learners to develop that comprehension. And how are we going to apply not only knowing about how the text works, the different text structures, but we need to teach our English learners about how to be strategic and active readers and teach them these metacognitive strategies that will help them to monitor their comprehension as they read. And so this is what we really discuss in chapter 8 of the book. So here's an example just, from a classroom about here are these text structures. And for our English learners, it's so helpful to have those signal words and those visuals. These are good English as a second language strategies for them, understanding the different text structures like the cause, effect, and problem solution, and knowing those signal words and knowing how I can visualize this and put it into a graphic organizer, which will help me with understanding what I'm supposed to be thinking about as I read. And that will help me to get to the ultimate goal of comprehension. We also know in the chapters 9 and 10, we're going to really address spelling development for English learners, and we're going to really talk about written language. And I kind of combined this just for the sake of time, but there's much that we need to be aware of for the unique spelling patterns of English learners that are related oftentimes to their native language knowledge. And so we can capitalize upon that. And in chapter 9, I really have a bunch of charts to really help you understand why they make the types of spelling errors that they make and what you can do about it, right? How we can celebrate it and say, oh, well, good for you. You're using your knowledge, but now let's apply that knowledge to the English language. And then in the writing chapter, we really talk about grammar and what's similar across these various languages that many of our English learners speak in their homes, and how we can help them to understand words, how words work, and how we can help them expand those sentence structures. And then from those sentence structures that we build, we also want to use those graphic organizers to facilitate that paragraph structure knowledge. And so between chapters 9 and 10, we're really exploring spelling and written language development amongst English learners. And here I wanted to include for you just an example. So the English learner might say something like, I see a man walking, right? And I might say something like, oh, good. That was a complete sentence. Can you describe the man? Like, can I get a better idea of the man? What does he look like? And he says, oh, I see a tall, slender man looking. Oh, now I see him as a very tall and slender man. Can you tell me where he's walking? Oh, I see a tall, slender man walking in the park. Oh, now I know where he's walking. Can you tell me why he's in the park? Oh, I see a tall, slender man walking his dog in the park. Oh, now I know. He's walking his dog. His dog is in the park, right? And so that is why he's in the park. So, why is he walking the dog? Well, I see a tall, slender man walking his dog in the park for exercise. Now I understand why he takes the dog for a walk in the park. This was an outstanding elaboration of your sentence. So you can see right there by asking those questions, this is going to help our students to expand that sentence structure. And then in the book also we have technology, and we have an appendix of technology that really helps instructors, educators understand the purpose of the different types of technology, whether that be instructional technology or assistive technology. So one is for, what we're going to use to help to learn concepts, and the other one's going to help to assist when we're having some difficulties, right? And so in the appendix, there is, introduction and really talking about also the recommendations and the differences between instructional technology and assistive technology, but also really providing different kinds of applications and different tools for English learners with a description and also the links to those. So that is a wonderful ending to the book. And I do want to tell you that through Brooks Publishing, there is, and I'm sure they'll talk about, some of the online resources that go hand in hand with the book. So thank you. Let's move on. So what I want to tell you is, just learning about Literacy Foundations for English Learners book, and maybe something that you heard today, what's something that you want to take away from today and that you want to implement perhaps in your instruction with students who are English learners, and how can you remind yourself to really implement this and review how well you're doing with implementing some of these key ideas and key components for working in language and literacy with English learners, and very definitely share with you your experience with your colleagues, because it's our goal to really spread the word about effective practices for developing language and literacy amongst English learners. Awesome. So I just whizzed through that. I know I put a lot in there, but I wanted to really kind of give you a brief overview of each of the chapters of this book. So now we can open up for some questions, and I believe I'll get some assistance with that.
Hi, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. We got a lot of great questions, so let's just get right into it. One of the first questions we got was, children with good language skills and poor phonological awareness skills often guess at words and decoding skills are poor. Dyslexic profile. How do you encourage decoding rather than guessing?
Yeah, so that's called kind of like the logographic or visual cue phase when we think about, word reading strategies. And that is one of the biggest challenges for really teaching our students with dyslexia, that you're not going to be able to memorize a million words. And so I'm teaching you these word parts, right? And I'm teaching you the letters and sounds to learn how to read these syllables and words, to be able to decode not only the words that we're reading, but it'll really generate and it'll really expand, and you can generalize that knowledge to reading, more than 85% of the words in the English language being predictable. And so it is quite a challenge. And what we do is, sometimes what I do is actually put up fake words and we actually work on the syllable division and looking at the syllable types to really kind of hone in on, you're not going to memorize this word because you're not going to experience it. And kind of play like games with that to get them to get away from that strategy of guessing and looking at how words look. And that is a big challenge with students with dyslexia. And so I think just really teaching them about, how effective knowing the letters and sounds and the types of syllables can help them with their decoding.
That is a great answer, and that's a good tip as well that people can utilize. Another question we got was, if a student can't blend and segment syllables, do they have to master that first before moving to the phoneme level, or can they work on the syllable and phonemes level simultaneously?
Yes. And so, I that's an excellent question. And I like to say that it is fine to move along the continuum. You do know that phonemes, working with the individual sounds is the highest form of phonological awareness. But definitely, you can move along up and down the continuum from simple to complex phonological awareness skills. But I like that you're keeping in mind what have they mastered and what is still left to be mastered. And
Oh,
so it's perfectly fine to do that. And I'm so glad that you asked that question. We don't have to master, knowing how to blend syllables together in order to master phoneme blending.
hmm. Another question was, do you directly address differences in speech perception? For example, if a Korean student can't hear the difference between B and P, do you target speech perception by itself first before addressing reading those letters?
Okay, so you're absolutely correct. In one of in our process, what we do is we kind of do it uh, kind of as a comprehensive model. We first want to make sure you're absolutely right. Can they distinguish and discriminate the sounds? And we try to make it very multisensory by having them, feel their throat to feel, did your vocal cords move? Now we're going to do it without your vocal cords on. And I actually use that strategy to teach new sounds of the English language, especially if they had the sound that was the partner sound, which we call either the cognate or the minimal pairs of sounds. I especially use that procedure for teaching new sounds of the English language when in fact they may have the counterpart of that sound. And so let me just give you an example. Remember in our session today, I was trying to teach them the letter J because that's very challenging for English learners. And the sound for J is J. So one of the ways I get at that is teaching them, they have a hard time with J. But the counterpart, the partner pair of J is the CH sound, ch. And so they have that in many languages, like for example, in the Spanish language, they have ch. So to get at that target of j, I ask them to touch their vocal cords and say ch first. Now turn on your vocal box, right? And now say it harder and louder, j, j, j. Now say it without your vocal cords vibrating so much, ch, 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 j, j, j. And so that's one of the ways to get at the discrimination and get them to know these new sounds of the English language.
Great response. I think that's going to be really helpful to our attendees. Another person asked, how much of a student's day should they be spending on English instruction?
Yeah, so there's lots of different models and lots of things to consider. And so there's different models, and I actually talk about the models in chapter 3 of the book in regards to speaking about whether they're in a like dual language model where they're trying to do two languages at the same time, where it's 50% in the native language and 50% in the second language. And there's others who have like, well, no, we're going to do an immersion in the second language of English with only, 15 to 20% of the day. And so what we're finding is, you need to really make sure that the students have, some nice language skills in their native language, because that will make them very successful in the second language. And it's okay to do things simultaneously as
Mhm.
well as sequentially, but always keeping in mind the native language as supporting that second language. And so I think there's not really a direct answer to that. I think it depends upon the schools and the models that they're using. But what you need to be thinking about is what resources do the children have and how can I capitalize upon that? And a good train of thought, a good, what we know from research is when they have a stronger foundation in their native language, it certainly helps second language development and second language literacy development.
That is another great response. And speaking of resources and languages, someone else asked, we had a few questions actually about whether you should utilize an interpreter available if student doesn't speak English.
Oh, okay. You mean like in assessment, or was that in assessment or treatment? Or I guess you don't have a choice, right?
Right. I
Um,
don't have the specifics, but I guess if you
yeah.
want to
So,
both.
I have many stories about interpreters. One of the things is like oh my gosh, like when I don't understand Vietnamese, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm trying to do an assessment, and I say like maybe 3 words, and then the interpreter says like 10 or 15 words, and I'm like, no, don't give the answer. And part of it was, a cultural thing, not wanting the person to look like they didn't know. And I had to really, you have to work with your interpreters about what's
Right,
the purpose of the assessment, because they're wanting it, for the individual not to feel like, they're not capable or think any less of them. I'm like, no, we're here to help. But if
right.
you give me the answer and give too much, I don't know what to do to help. And so I think it's working with our interpreters in that manner. And I think also through our interpreters, we can learn a lot, and we can be asking a lot about the language and the culture. And I think when you have a great partnership with the interpreter, it'll work, but you have to kind of set some parameters so they really understand your purpose, and then try to understand the cultural context around that. And so I've gone through a lot of learning experiences, and it's been a good collaboration with interpreters.
Definitely. You got to build that relationship so you're on the same page.
Yes.
I think we'll ask one more question, just be conscious of
Sure.
everyone's time. Someone asked, for Spanish speakers, are there particular letter sound relationships that you recommend teaching first?
Was that to teach Spanish or to teach English?
Um, let's see, for Spanish speakers, are there particular letter sound? I think English, I want to
Okay.
say.
So one of the beautiful things we talk about in our phonics chapter, chapter 5, we give some charts in regards to, here are the direct transfers. Here are the consonant sounds and the vowel sounds that are exactly the same from this native language to English. And then what we want to do is then focus on the new sounds, but we also talk about making those sound approximations like I was showing you
Mhm.
versus voiced and voiceless. And then we go into and we want to teach, like for example, in some languages they want you to teach all the vowels first. Well, that's
Right.
not very helpful, because you have to have a vowel with a consonant to read a word, right? And so we go, the way we design in curriculum design, you go by frequency. You have kind of some parameters where you don't want to teach concepts that are very similar in their sound or in their meaning, in their sound, or in also in their visual representation either. And so so we would teach individual letters and sounds first. We would teach vowels with consonants. We would teach the syllable types, and then we would move on to things like diphthongs and triphthongs and consonant blends, things like that.
Definitely a process for sure.
Yeah.
But thank you for all these
Oh,
great
great question.
responses. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And
Thank
I want to
you.
just thank everyone for sharing their questions as well. We're going to head over to the next slide. Perfect. We just want to remind everyone watching this webinar, you will be able to download a certificate of attendance. Everyone watching live, you can download your certificate from the handouts pane. And live attendees, you'll also be emailed your certificate in the next 24 hours. And then another reminder that you will be prompted to complete a short survey at the conclusion of the presentation. We would love to know what you thought of the webinar, and anyone who completes the survey will be entered to win a free copy of Elsa's book.
Yay.
I'd also like to remind you that we are offering a 20% off discount on our products, including Elsa's book, Literacy Foundations for English Learners, through the end of January. So anyone who watches this webinar or the recording can use the code COFFEECHAT at checkout to receive the discount.
Perfect.
If you're looking for more professional development webinar opportunities over the coming weeks, be sure to visit the Brooks Publishing website for the latest additions to our Coffee Chat series. We're hosting chats with our esteemed authors, and we would love for you to join us. And for additional support, we just want to let everyone know they can visit the link on the screen. On this page, you'll find a collection of recommended readings, downloadable resources, professional development webinars from Brooks and other leading organizations. So definitely check that out.
All right.
Just
So
one, oh, go ahead.
yes, go ahead.
Just one final reminder, if you are watching live, you can download a certificate from the handouts pane or it will be emailed to you. And again, I just want to thank everyone who attended. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. And Elsa, you did amazing. And we really just appreciate you spending your time with us as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Great questions. Appreciate it.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.